Before Michael Jackson became the king of pop, before the moonwalk, before Thriller, before his face was on every television screen on the planet, Berry Gordy looked at a young boy from Gary, Indiana, and made a decision that most people still don't fully understand. He looked at that boy's name, the real name, the family name, and he decided it wasn't going to work, not because the name was bad, but because Berry Gordy had a plan so calculated, so far ahead of anything happening in music at that time, that the name was only the first piece of it. Stay with us through all 10 reasons, because the final one will completely change how you see Michael Jackson's entire career. Reason number 10. The marketplace was already crowded. Here is something that almost never gets mentioned when people trace the origins of Michael Jackson's rise to fame. When the Jackson 5 first landed on Berry Gordy's radar in 1968, Motown Records was not just a successful label, it was an empire. A perfectly calibrated, relentlessly profitable hit-making machine home to the Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, and the Supremes, Smokey Robinson. Every single one of those artists had been carefully positioned, carefully packaged, and carefully named for maximum commercial impact. There was nothing random about any of it. Now picture Berry Gordy sitting across from 5 brothers from Gary, Indiana. Talented? Without question. Electrifying? Absolutely. But the Jacksons, that is a last name. That is a family name, that is not a brand. And Berry Gordy understood something in 1968 that most music executives wouldn't figure out for decades in a crowded market. The name is the product before the music ever plays. Before anyone presses play, the name has already told the listener what to expect. He needed something that felt like an event. Something that felt like more than a group, not a family reunion act, not a surname-based ensemble, a phenomenon. And so the very first step in engineering what would become the greatest solo pop career in the history of recorded music started with something as simple and as ruthlessly calculated as a name. But that decision didn't exist in isolation. It was the first move in a strategy so deep that most people, even today, have never seen the full picture. Every slot on the Motown roster was valuable real estate. Gordy was not going to hand it to an act that hadn't been engineered for maximum commercial return. The name had to justify the investment before a single dollar was spent on recording. Think about what it means to compete on a label that already has Marvin Gaye, already has Stevie Wonder, already has Diana Ross. You are not just competing in the market, you are competing internally for resources, attention, and promotional muscle. The name had to be a weapon from day one. Reason number 9. Berry Gordy's branding philosophy was built on illusion. To truly understand why Berry Gordy made the choices he made with Michael Jackson, you have to understand the man himself at a level most documentaries never go to. Berry Gordy did not simply start a record label, he built a mythology factory. From the very first day, Motown was engineered to sell a dream, a polished, aspirational, carefully controlled version of black excellence that could walk through the front door of mainstream white America without triggering resistance. That was the mission. That was always the mission. He sent his artists to finishing school. He hired choreographers, etiquette coaches, speech and diction trainers. Diana Ross did not simply become Diana Ross. The Temptations did not accidentally develop their look, their movements, their stage presence. Every element was a conscious construction. And names were an absolutely critical part of that construction. Names were, in Gordy's mind, the first advertisement, the first promise made to the listener before they had ever heard a single note. Gordy believed with total conviction that a name carried psychological weight that went far beyond identification. It told the listener what to feel before the needle ever hit the record. When you heard the Supremes, you felt luxury, aspiration, elegance. When you heard the Miracles, you felt something transcendent. When you heard the Temptations, you felt desire and danger and allure. Now ask yourself honestly, what did you feel when you heard the Jacksons? Nothing specific, because it meant nothing yet. Gordy had studied how the major white pop acts of the era were branded and packaged. He understood that perception was not a byproduct of success, it was the engine of it. The illusion had to be constructed before the reality could catch up. And Michael, even at 10 years old, fit the illusion perfectly. He was magnetic, he was unthreatening, he was joyful on stage in a way that disarmed every room he walked into. Gordy just needed to build the right frame around that energy, and the name was the frame.
If you enjoyed this video, we invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update, and the real stories behind the music that built the world we live in. Don't miss the next one. We will see you there. Back to the countdown.
Reason number 8. The Jackson family name carried too much baggage. This next reason is going to make some people uncomfortable. But the full story of Berry Gordy and Michael Jackson cannot be told honestly without going here. When Gordy first encountered the Jackson family, not just the boys, but the entire family unit, he learned very quickly that the family dynamic was complicated. Joseph Jackson, the father, was a force of nature. Intensely driven, relentlessly ambitious, and by multiple accounts, willing to push his children to the edge of what was humanly acceptable in pursuit of success.
Don't blame it on the sunshine. Don't blame it on the moon.
Berry Gordy was above all other things protective of the Motown brand. He had spent the better part of a decade building an image of sophistication, class, and control, an image that was essential to Motown's crossover commercial success. The absolute last thing he could afford was for the turbulent, complicated reality of the Jackson family's home life to bleed into the public narrative around his newest act. The music industry press in that era was aggressive and relentless. One wrong story, one exposed family conflict, and the carefully constructed image would crack. By separating the stage identity from the family identity, by branding the group as a tightly packaged commercial unit, rather than emphasizing their surname and family origins, Gordy created a firewall. A protective barrier between what was happening in private and what the public was allowed to see. Michael, in particular, was being groomed from the very beginning, not merely as a member of a group, but as a standalone future superstar. And a future superstar of that magnitude needed a standalone identity, one that could be controlled, shaped, protected, and ultimately monetized in ways that a family name never could be. The entertainment press was not kind in that era. A single expose about family dysfunction could undo months of carefully managed promotional work. Gordy had seen it happen to other acts, and he was not going to let it happen here. Keeping the brand clean meant keeping it separated from the personal. The Jackson family was a real family with real problems, and real families with real problems do not belong on the surface of a carefully engineered commercial product. That was Gordy's logic, and it was coldly effective. Reason number 7. Motown owned the narrative and names were part of the contract. Let's talk about something that rarely enters the public conversation around Michael Jackson's early career, and that is the contracts. When artists signed to Motown Records, they were not simply signing over their music. They were signing over enormous control of their image, their presentation, their public persona, and their professional identity. That was the deal Berry Gordy offered. That was always the deal. And it was a deal that most artists, hungry for their shot at success, accepted without fully understanding what they were agreeing to. Gordy structured Motown's contracts in a way that gave the label, and by direct extension, Berry Gordy himself, sweeping creative authority over every artist on the roster. The clothes you wore, the words you said in interviews, the songs you were allowed to record, the people you were seen with in public. Every single touch point of your professional existence was filtered through Gordy's vision of what was commercially optimal. And that authority absolutely included naming rights and brand identity construction. When the Jackson 5 came to Motown, Gordy made every significant decision about how they would be presented to the world. The group name was his construction: clean, energetic, digestible, and universal. It communicated youth and vitality without carrying any of the complexity that comes with family surnames and the baggage of personal histories. And Michael, specifically, was being watched with particular intensity, because Berry Gordy could see something in that boy that even the boy's own father had not fully reckoned with yet. Those contracts were not just legal documents. They were blueprints for who you were going to be, and, more importantly, who you were not going to be allowed to be for as long as Motown held the paper. Artists signed their identities over, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. The Jackson family, coming from Gary, Indiana, with no major label experience and no industry lawyers fighting in their corner, had limited leverage. Gordy knew it. And the terms of the deal reflected it in every clause that touched on image, presentation, and name. Reason number 6. The Jackson 5 name was designed to be temporary. Here is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating, and this is the dimension that most people completely miss when they look back at Berry Gordy's handling of the Jackson 5. When Gordy branded the group with that name, he was not thinking about a 50-year legacy. He was not thinking about how historians would look back on this moment. He was thinking about a 5 to 7 year commercial window, because he had seen this pattern play out before. Young acts with massive early success almost always had a predictable shelf life. The question was never whether the group would sustain forever. The question was always what comes after. From almost the very beginning of Michael's time at Motown, Gordy's long-range strategic vision included solo stardom for Michael as the inevitable destination. The group was the incubator. It was the training ground, the performance laboratory, the safe commercial container in which Michael could develop his instincts, his stage presence, his vocal control, his magnetism, all within the protective structure of a group act. The Jackson 5 name kept Michael tethered to a collective identity, which made him safe, palatable, and non-threatening to mainstream audiences. But here is what makes this so extraordinary. The group name that was designed to protect Michael and ease him into the mainstream was simultaneously the cage that would eventually have to be broken open. Gordy was building the runway while knowing full well that the plane would one day need to leave it entirely. And And that transition, the careful, deliberate peeling away of the group identity from the solo identity, was already being mapped out in Berry Gordy's mind while Michael was still a kid singing I Want You Back on national television. Gordy had done this before. He had watched Diana Ross evolve from a member of the Supremes into a solo superstar, and he had engineered that transition himself. He knew exactly what the playbook looked like. Michael was next. The group name was always meant to be a launching pad, not a destination.
Listen to me, baby, that's all you gotta do. Oh, ABC.
Every hit the Jackson 5 scored, every television appearance, every screaming crowd, all of it was equity being deposited into a solo career that hadn't been announced yet. Gordy was playing a long game while everyone else was watching the short one.
It's gonna show you how to get a name.
Reason number 5. Race, radio, and the politics of the crossover sound. We have to go here because without this context, the naming decisions Berry Gordy made will never make complete sense.
And I want you. I need to do just so.
In the late 1960s and into the 1970s, the American music industry was structurally, systematically, and in many cases effectively segregated.
I got to get closer to your soul. You do know.
There were black radio stations and white radio stations. There were R&B charts and pop charts. And crossing from one commercial world into the other, achieving what the industry called crossover success, was the highest possible prize.
Do the proudest things. Let's shout. Shake your body now.
It was also an extraordinarily delicate, politically charged minefield. Berry Gordy had cracked the crossover formula more effectively than almost any other executive in the industry.
Let's shout. Let's shout. Shake your body now to the ground.
The entire Motown business model was built on it producing black music that white mainstream America could embrace, celebrate, and purchase without feeling uncomfortable or challenged.
Let's shout. Shake your body now to the ground.
The production was lush, the presentation was impeccable, the public personas were carefully managed, and the names, every single name on that roster, were chosen with crossover commercial viability as a primary consideration.
Let's shout. Shake your body now to the ground.
With the Jackson 5, Gordy applied that same formula with surgical precision. The name was energetic and youthful and completely universal.
Shake your body now to the ground.
It did not signal anything specific about geography, economic background, or social reality.
Shake your body now to the ground.
It was deliberately frictionless, designed to allow the music to do the work of crossing demographic boundaries without the name creating any resistance before the song even started.
To the ground, let's dance. Let's shout. Shake your body now.
And Michael specifically needed a stage identity that could travel across every demographic line without hesitation. Radio programmers in that era had enormous gatekeeping power. A program director at a white pop station could simply refuse to spin a record if the name on the label triggered any resistance.
Let's dance. Let's shout.
Gordy engineered against that friction from the very first conversation. The name the Jackson 5 carried was not an accident of affection or convenience. It was the result of calculated thinking about which doors in the American music industry that name would be able to open, and which one's Aurora, more explicitly family-rooted name might have found permanently closed. Reason number 4. Michael was being built as a brand, not just a singer. By the time Michael Jackson was 11 years old, 11 Berry Gordy had arrived at a conclusion that would take the rest of the world another decade to reach. Michael was not a singer, he was not a performer. He was not even in the traditional sense an artist, he was a brand. A living, breathing, endlessly replicable, infinitely scalable cultural phenomenon, if and only if he was handled with the right level of strategic sophistication from this moment forward. And handling Michael correctly meant treating his public name not as a personal identity, but as intellectual property. Think carefully about what that distinction actually means. Intellectual property can be owned, licensed, controlled, and monetized in ways that a simple family name never can be. When Berry Gordy constructed the branding architecture around the Jackson 5, and placed Michael at its commercial and emotional center, he was not just managing a music group, he was creating an asset class. An asset that could be placed on merchandise, extended into film, translated into television, and licensed for commercial endorsements. The stage identity held deliberately separate from the private individual, separate from the complicated family dynamics, separate from the rough and painful edges of real life in the Jackson household, was a vessel. A vessel that could be filled and refilled with whatever narrative was most commercially powerful at any given moment. Gordy had done this with Diana Ross. He had done it with Stevie Wonder. But with Michael, there was a magnitude of possibility that was simply in a different category from anything he had encountered before. Brands do not have bad days. Brands do not have family arguments or report cards or childhood insecurities. Brands are consistent, controlled, and infinitely repeatable. Gordy was determined that whatever Michael was in private, what the public saw would be pristine. Every interview was coached. Every television appearance was choreographed down to the smallest detail. And the brand name, was the first and most visible symbol of that separation between the real child and the commercial construction that Gordy was building around him. Reason number 3. Berry Gordy feared a competitor would steal Michael. Let's talk about something that almost never enters the conversation about Michael Jackson's early career, and that is fear. Berry Gordy was not a man who operated from fear very often. He was calculating, controlled, and usually several steps ahead of any threat. But when it came to Michael Jackson, there was a very specific and very real anxiety that drove some of his most controlling decisions during those Motown years. He was afraid that someone else would recognize exactly what he had recognized and move to take it. The music industry of the early 1970s was predatory in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate from a modern perspective. Rival labels had absolutely no hesitation about approaching artists, especially young artists, whose professional representation consisted primarily of an ambitious but unsophisticated parent, with competing offers, restructured deals, somehow, some way, and the promise of creative freedom and greater financial rewards. Atlantic Records, CBS, other major players were always watching, always circling, always looking for the opening. Joseph Jackson, for all his intensity and his iron will, was not a polished music industry negotiator. Nothing's gonna stop me now. He was a father who wanted success for his sons and who could be flattered, courted, and potentially redirected if the right offer arrived at the right moment. Gotta find a way somehow. By creating a proprietary, deeply embedded brand identity around the Jackson 5 and around Michael specifically, Gordy was constructing walls. Legal walls, contractual walls. Oh, you're gone. Brand identity walls that made extraction and reinvention by a competitor enormously difficult. Gordy had lost artists before. I depended on you. He knew what it felt like to develop talent, invest resources, build a platform, and then watch someone walk out the door toward a better offer. Though you're gone. He was not going to let that happen with Michael, not with this one. The brand identity was the trap. The more deeply Michael was associated with the Motown sound, I depended on you. The Motown image, the Motown name structure, the harder it became for any competitor to simply rebrand him and sell him to the public as something new. Gordy was building a moat, and for years that moat held. How could you do me? Reason number 2. The moment Gordy realized Michael was bigger than Motown, There is a moment, and people who were inside Motown during this period have described it in various ways over the years, when Berry Gordy came to a realization that fundamentally changed his relationship with Michael Jackson.
Sunshine, don't blame it on the moonlight. Don't blame
It was the moment Gordy understood that Michael was not just his most valuable asset. It was the moment he understood that Michael Jackson was larger than Motown itself.
Sunshine, moonlight, yeah.
And that realization carried equal measures of pride and something that felt uncomfortably close to dread. It happened the way these seismic shifts always happen, gradually, then suddenly and all at once.
On the moonlight, don't on the good times.
The records kept selling at numbers that defied expectation. The live performances kept escalating beyond anything the industry had seen from an act this young.
You just got the sunshine, yeah. Moonlight.
The cultural footprint kept expanding into territory that Motown's existing infrastructure was simply not designed to handle.
Good times, good times.
And Berry Gordy began to see something he had never encountered in his entire career: an artist who was actively outgrowing the container that had been built specifically to hold him. The name structure, the branding architecture, the group identity framework, the entire Motown machinery, all of it was becoming too small.
The devil's got them to me to this day.
And here is the paradox that Gordy had to confront directly. The very control systems he had constructed to protect and develop Michael were now the things most likely to limit what Michael could ultimately become.
Bruise me, that dirty rhythm fools me. The devil's got.
The stage name construct had done its job almost too well. Michael was now so fully formed as a cultural force that managing him the way Gordy managed his other acts was no longer sustainable.
Blame it on the sunshine, don't blame it on the moonlight. Don't.
There is a specific kind of discomfort that comes with watching something you built outgrow you. Gordy had experienced success before enormous success, but he had never before created something that he could no longer fully contain. Michael was becoming something without a precedent.
I just can't control my feet. I just can't.
The question was no longer whether Michael would eventually operate outside the Motown system.
Moonlight, don't blame it on the good times. Blame it on the.
The question had quietly shifted to when and on whose terms. Gordy was smart enough to know the answer, and that knowledge changed the energy in every room where the two of them sat across from each other.
Don't you blame it, sunshine. Don't blame.
Reason number one. The real reason was control, and the day Michael took it back, we have reached the reason that makes every other reason on this list make complete sense. And this is the one that most people dance around, that most storytellers soften, that most documentaries frame more gently than the truth actually requires. So we are going to say it directly. The foundational reason Berry Gordy controlled the naming and branding of Michael Jackson from the very beginning, the reason underneath all the other reasons, was power.
Dancing all over the place.
Not cruelty, not exploitation in the simplest sense, power. The power to shape the narrative, to direct the trajectory, to capture the financial upside, and to protect the asset in whatever way best served Berry Gordy's vision of what was possible. The name was a leash. A golden leash, a brilliant leash, a leash that in the hands of someone with Gordy's instincts made Michael Jackson one of the most recognizable human beings who has ever lived. But it was a leash nonetheless. And the moment that reframes everything, the moment that casts every single reason we have discussed today in its true light, is the moment Michael Jackson walked away from Motown, signed with Epic Records, and began the deliberate, methodical process of becoming not just the biggest recording artist in the world, but the sole architect of his own mythology. When Michael stepped out from under the Motown naming and branding structure, he did not leave the identity behind. He claimed it, he owned it outright.
Let's have a good time, you and me. Sitting there.
He turned it into the most powerful commercial weapon in entertainment history. Off the wall. Thriller. Bad.
Enjoy yourself, enjoy yourself, enjoy yourself.
The most successful commercial run any solo artist has ever assembled, built on a foundation Berry Gordy poured, but that Michael Jackson decided, on his own terms and in his own time, to live in forever.
Enjoy yourself, enjoy yourself, enjoy yourself.
The student had learned every lesson the teacher had to offer, and then went somewhere the teacher could not follow.
Don't live the life you got.
That is not a betrayal, that is the completion of the education. Gordy built the blueprint. Michael built the empire. That is the real story, not a villain, not a victim. Two extraordinarily ambitious men.
Come on, girl, let's get it. While the music's alive and hot.
One of whom understood what the other was worth before the other understood it himself, and the long, complicated, brilliant negotiation between them that gave the world the greatest entertainer who ever lived.
Enjoy yourself, enjoy yourself, enjoy yourself.
If you enjoyed this video, we invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And the real stories behind the music that built the world we live in. Don't miss the next one. We will see you there.